Katy Faust, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my joy. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to me. I know you do a lot of good work, and I look forward to hearing more about it. So, before we jump into it, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you come from, what your background is?
Yeah, I would never have thought I was doing any of the things that I was doing. I was just a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids, pastor's wife. My youngest is adopted from China, and a couple years after that, the same-sex marriage debate heated up. And what I heard proponents of same-sex marriage arguing was that kids don't care if they have 2 moms or 2 dads, which functionally means kids don't care if they've lost their mom or dad. And my husband and I had been working with kids in a variety of different ways for a couple decades. And to me, like, that was one of the greatest lies that you could say about kids, that they don't care. Because what I had seen in my work, at the adoption agency or in youth ministry or working with kids or just getting to know the friends, the children of my friends, or what I remember from my own childhood and what my husband experienced in his childhood, was when children are not raised by their mother and father, when one of them is gone, not only is it a challenge, but very often it creates somewhat of a primal wound, a wound that goes all the way down to your core, that then sometimes you can resolve through healing or therapy, but sometimes is never resolved. So that was enough for me to say, okay, I am going to get involved in this public debate about marriage. Whereas before I had been very hesitant. I am more of a grace giver than a truth teller by nature, and I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to lose friends. But when I saw what was very obviously the weaponization of childhood wounds to advance a political goal, that was enough for me to say, now you have to go through me. And then the more I started writing about why marriage is a matter of justice for children, the more I saw how all of the marriage and family issues, from divorce to reproductive technologies to the promotion of all kinds of modern families, even to the way we think and talk about adoption, all of them were obsessively focused on the desires of adults. And it was always the rights and well-being of children that suffered because we were misidentifying the victims in those questions. So in 2018, I started Them Before Us, which is a global nonprofit to prioritize children, their rights to their mother and father in all matters and all conversations about marriage and family. So that's currently what I'm doing. I am currently a crusader for kids.
Well, they need it, and thank God that you're doing it. So, before we get further into that, can you give us a little bit of sense of the other things you're involved in? Because I also saw you on the ARC initiative.
Yeah, man, 2023 was, all of these things that we start, it's like a snowball. You work so hard in the early years, and it looks like there's very little momentum. But the more you go and the more you build, the faster and the more velocity it takes on. So I think that's what 2023 was for us. It was the year where we really saw how much velocity had been involved in, where all of our work for the first couple of years had taken us. So I've always been involved ever since I started writing with Canavox, which is an initiative of the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton. Very grateful for the work they're doing, have helped them develop some projects, especially for teens, looking at marriage, gender, sex, relationships from a natural law perspective in a way that's very digestible for middle schoolers and high schoolers. I also, this last year, was invited to be on the advisory board for ARC, which is the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, Jordan Peterson's new project, which, the way that I put what ARC is it's the righteous inverse of the World Economic Forum. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We want that same level of global influence, but we want to do it in principles grounded in personal responsibility and human flourishing and understanding the dignity of humans rather than viewing our species as a blight or a parasite on, Mother Earth or whatever. So it's been a joy to be a part of that. Them Before Us has quite a few initiatives that we're developing for next year, which are very, very exciting. And it was just amazing to be able to reach new audiences on platforms last year. I was on Tammy Peterson's podcast, and I got to be on Tim Pool's show. Have, thank God, wonderful, been on with Alex Clark, Turning Point USA host, and Allie Beth Stuckey. I mean, these two women have such clarity on issues that seem to elude a lot of other pundits out there. So I'm just so thankful for the way that this child-centric message is reaching not just your typical audience of sort of Christians, but broader audiences too of conservatives who I think have had a hard time articulating exactly what the problem is, especially if you come from a more libertarian background. What exactly is the problem with normalizing or promoting what they view as just consensual adult decisions? And the answer is those consensual adult decisions always force children to sacrifice their fundamental rights so adults can live as they please. And that is a recipe for an unjust society.
Well, they do such a good job of controlling the narrative. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept of persuasion, which is it's a psychological marketing concept by a renowned psychologist. And the idea is you persuade them before they even realize they've been persuaded by just setting the terms of the discussion. So it's just assumed when we're discussing that, oh yeah, it's about like individual rights and the mother's right to choose and whatever other application, but just presuming from the outset that we're not going to consider the rights of the child, and you're just flipping the narrative there.
Okay, I love that. I love it. And you probably saw my eyes like, wow, light bulb moment. Because the other thing that I got to produce in 2023 was a parenting book co-authored with my co-writer Stacey Manning, and it's called Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. And it really is just, how do you inculcate your worldview when everything is against you? So one of our principles is persuasion, but that's not what we call it. But that's such a good term. One of our principles we call the founder's principle, which is you have to get to your kid first. Whoever gets to the kid first with information about something that is controversial or salacious or really just any distorted idea, if you get to your kids first about it, you really establish yourself as the default authority in their life, and they will come back to you, right? But if it is the fourth grader who holds a smartphone up into your kid's face and that's the first time they learn about porn, your kid will not go to you when they have questions about porn. They will go to the fourth grader. So persuasion is probably a better term for what we sort of narrate in one of the chapters of our book on effective worldview transmission. You do need to persuade your kids with narratives that are good, true, and beautiful. And then you have to kind of cut off the opposition at the knees by telling kids what the other side is going to say to them about the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Nice. I hadn't thought of that. And that's why these collectivist ideologies, whatever form they come in, they work on having basically the government or the ideology have the quickest access to the child and removing the family, the parents from that equation, right? Even like mandatory education.
Yeah, and I there's a lot of big questions going on in the world today, and we obviously look at all marriage and family issues from the perspective of the child. But one of the biggest questions, the most fundamental questions that our society may be at, well, number one is, what does it mean to be human? That's number one. But number two is probably, to whom do children belong? Once you answer that question, a lot of the other issues are going to resolve themselves, right? Everything from transgender treatments to what can they be taught in school to, what about drag queen story hour, where and when and who pays for it and all of that. I mean, what about who should get vaccines and what do kids need before you're allowed to send them to school, and experimental vaccines and all of that kind of thing. So first you answer the question, to whom do children belong? And there's a rival, very consequential, different answers. The left would say they belong to the state. They belong to the village. They belong to all of us. And we say they don't belong to you. They are not your children. They are my children. They belong to me. You don't even know their name. So they don't belong to you. They belong to me. So that fundamental fissure along those lines, right, you are going to answer an awful lot of the big worldview and political questions we're asking today.
Yeah, that's key. I've never heard a phrase like that. To whom do they belong? That's just another form of persuasion that we come into the argument thinking that, oh yeah, it's already guaranteed that every kid has to be educated, otherwise you're breaking the law. They have to be put in school. But if they belong to the parents, then shouldn't the parents be making that, reflecting prudentially, making the judgment based on their circumstances and their knowledge of the kid and what's good for him or her, and deciding, well, what is that? Is that what's best?
Yeah.
So you're involved in Kinderbox, then for us, ARC. You do a lot of speaking. What are you most excited about? And let's start with them before us. What are you most excited about?
Well, there are things that I'm good at when it comes to running a nonprofit and getting on podcasts and talking to people and connecting, and writing articles and speaking I love that. But having a big vision and knowing how to apply these principles is an area where I've grown. And thankfully, I now have a very good team around me, who have helped me be creative about, okay, we've got this critical lens through which we look at all marriage and family issues. And that is, children have a right to their mother and father. All adults, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, must conform to those fundamental child rights. And in all situations, whether it's a struggling marriage or dealing with infertility or experiencing same-sex attraction or unwanted singleness or whatever it is, in all of those situations, someone is going to do the hard thing. The question is, will it be the adults or will it be the child? So at Them Before Us, in our world, it is the adults who do hard things, because the only alternative is for the child to do hard things on behalf of the adults. And that is an injustice. We don't, in this society, we do not force, in a just society, we don't force the weak to sacrifice for the strong. And yet, that is exactly how all these conversations about marriage and family have gone for decades. It is always, hey, the adult priorities, their sexual identity, their feelings, their longings, their losses, their hopes, their dreams, that always takes precedent. And then whatever the kid just has to live with whatever the parents decide, right? So at Them Before Us, we flip that around. So then how do you apply that to the world in terms of different projects? And so what we're going to do next year is we've figured out several ways that we need to apply that. We talk at Them Before Us about how we've always talked about how there's three major threats to the rights of children: cultural threats, legal threats, and technological threats. So the cultural threats have been going on since the sexual revolution, and it's embodied through these phrases like, if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy. More recently through phrases like, biology doesn't matter, love makes a family. Or this notion of, kids don't need a mom and dad, they just need to be safe and loved. So you've got all of these very powerful, like, cultural ideas that have shaped the way we think about marriage and family. And really, they've normalized mother and father loss for kids. That's really what they're doing. And then there are the legal changes, right? Beginning with no-fault divorce, where we legally said marriage no longer needs to be a permanent union. We moved into same-sex marriage, where we said marriage no longer needs to be a complementary union. And we will soon hit polygamy, that says marriage no longer needs to be a monogamous union. So we've got these legal changes that are deconstructing the rights of children. And then we have these dystopic technological changes, creating babies in a petri dish, buying one or both of their genetic parents out of a catalog, and now commercially gestating that child in the body of a third person, like an unrelated woman who's the quote unquote surrogate. We are moving towards the creation of artificial wombs. They are striving to now create egg cells out of skin cells. So in the future, a man can be both mother and father to a child. I mean, the technological changes are such a grave threat, and they don't get an awful lot of attention. Well, a little bit more in the last couple of years. So at Them Before Us, we see these three major areas that have functionally reduced children to accessories. That's really how our cultural and legal and technological imagination works. Now kids are just objects to be owed to whatever adult has the money and means to acquire them according to their identity and their desires and their longings, right? And a lot of the times we just validate it like, that's just progress, right? Or that's liberation, or whatever it is. So next year we've got projects that are addressing all three of those areas. We've got places where we're fighting back against the cultural narrative, and we're doing that in two ways. Number one, we've got a church curriculum that is coming out. Like, everything we do at Them Before Us is natural law based. leaning heavily on the stories of children who have been raised in these modern families, so you can look them in the face and see that indeed it did not matter that two mothers loved them, they still hungered for a father. But what we're doing in the church curriculum is we're actually saying there's threats within the Protestant world and the Catholic world to diminish or reduce or be silent about or to compromise on God's design for the family. And we make clear in our church curriculum, which is about 7 videos with an accompanying workbook, that if you abandon God's prescription for sex and marriage, you are victimizing children. Those two things go together in 100% of cases. You can either protect children or you can compromise. Like, those are the two options. So we work through all the different manifestations of modern family, and we look at the connection between God's priorities from his meta story of the strongest of all coming down to sacrifice for the weakest and most vulnerable and most wicked, which is in our case, and how we as Christians are supposed to go and do likewise when it comes to defending the defenseless, to looking at how he insists that his people care for the fatherless all throughout the Old Testament, especially. And when we compromise on what scripture says, we're actually incentivizing and endorsing fatherlessness. So it's like we just really want to draw a straight line between what the Bible says and these principles of child first family formation. So we've got that happening. We also are going to be co-producing a massive documentary with focus on the family that is going to be distributed globally and available on, Amazon or Hulu or whatever. And it is going to be the child-centric case for not just man-woman marriage, but really pointing out the harms of these other cultural, legal, and technological changes. So we've got those projects happening. We are working with a lot of global coalitions to attack big fertility, right? That is not a benevolent nonprofit. This is not an adoption agency that's trying to rescue children. This is a marketplace. Big fertility is a marketplace that is buying and selling children. So we have several national and international coalitions that we are forming and participating in to fight back this global threat. We're also starting a legal department to not just continue to fight the bad child commodifying bills popping up in the United States and abroad, but we also have a strategy to retake ground on the marriage issue. So that's very exciting. And I don't know of any other organization that is working to overturn Obergefell. So we're going to give that a shot. And then we also are going to move into the corporate world in terms of the corporate world has done quite a bit to undermine marriage and family, from legitimizing same-sex partnerships to paying for adult transition or children's transition through their HR benefits, or flying people to get abortions or funding IVF and the use of sperm or egg donors and subsidizing surrogates. I mean, a lot of the ways that the corporate world recruits and retains their employees is through these quote unquote health benefits that actually violate the rights of children. So we are going to create a children's first HR benefit package for any business that wants to use their corporate heft to protect children and elevate their dignity. We're going to tell them exactly what that looks like. And we've got a satirical video that we're in the process of producing that is going to reveal how these corporate benefits that help their ESG scores so much actually do so on the backs of children. So we've got a lot happening.
Excellent. So inspiring.
Yeah.
How did you develop this collaboration with Focus on the Family and then with the other groups you're talking about?
I've got an inside man at Focus on the Family. There's a guy there whose name is Glenn Stanton, and he's written so many books. In my opinion, he is the national, maybe international expert on maternal paternal differences in terms of like caring for and interacting with their kids. So I've learned from him for a long time, and he's been on my advisory board. He's a vice president there. So he has been, I don't know, there's so much of this process of starting a nonprofit and trying to create a global movement. It looks like it's the Katy show, but it's not. Oh my gosh, there's so many good people who have helped in so many different ways to move the ball forward, to show me where I'm headed in the wrong direction, to encourage me in a new direction. And he's totally been one of them. He's always just offered his insight and his practical help. So we went to focus on the family because of his connection there. And he's been a big part of helping that to come to fruition. And then ARC, John Anderson is one of the big four founders of ARC. He is the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, and I would say they're preeminent conservative statesmen. Like, statesmanship has kind of gone out of style, but not with John Anderson. He's got an incredible podcast, incredible video show, interviews amazing people. Stacey and I got to be on it about a year ago. And he said something like, has Jordan Peterson read your book? And I was like, haha, nope. And he's like, well, maybe I can help with that. And I'm like, okay, John. And a few months later, he's like, you want to be on the advisory board for this big new global project. So I just feel, again, like, what a gift to be in a place where we have the ability to collaborate with and work shoulder to shoulder with so many people that are done rolling over. They are ready to fight for a renewal, for marriage, family, for Western civilization. And honestly, most of them are doing it because of and in the name of Christ. It's amazing to me. We were at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London, the first kind of gathering of everybody together, 1,500 people, 1,500 global leaders from, I think, 75 different countries. And you could not get there without an invitation. So those of us on the advisory board, we got to invite all the people that we felt were adhering to the 6 principles that ARC had set out as their fundamental values. Nobody set out to just invite Christians and Jews. Like, we just were inviting the people that were doing the best work on energy, the best work on social fabric, the best work in terms of renewing education, the best one in terms of like purifying the administrative state, the best in terms of defending free speech. I mean, we just invited the people that were actually putting forth, not just critiquing, but putting forth a new vision of flourishing. And when we were at the conference, I think the moment that's going to stand out for me the most was Jonathan Pajot was giving a speech, and he's an Orthodox believer. He's an iconographer. Sorry. And he asked, how many people in the audience adhere to a formal religion? And 95% of the hands went up in the room. 95%. And I asked him later, I said, how many were you expecting? And he said, I thought it was going to be 50-50. And I actually felt bad then saying, oh, okay, how many of you guys don't adhere to a formal religion? And, there was maybe 25 hands total in the room. And I mean, like, what does that tell you? That there is good work happening. I am so amazed that I get to partner with some of the people that are doing it. And largely the people that are doing it are serious about God, are serious about following Christ and letting him change the way that they operate in the world, whether it's vocationally or personally. And I'm so inspired by it all. People that are saying, I will not hide my faith. It is not just a private matter. It is going to be public in all the ways that God tells me for it to be public. So, I mean, I think that in many ways you're doing that in your work. Like, you are allowing those timeless principles to inform how you serve your clients. And that is the way forward. That is the way forward.
Yeah, it is striking how much it seems like it's Abrahamic religions or Christianity specifically against the world. And maybe that's because God alone is good. That's all goodness we have comes from him. And without him, we're not capable of very much. And we see the consequences of that, of the atheist regimes. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I do try to emphasize the natural law principles, which at least in theory are accessible by reason. And there have been non-religious philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, who have discovered these. But then in practice, it's unless you have the luxury of being a aristocrat and can spend your entire life studying things, and practice, having a formal religion really helps. It helps you come to these truths.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then we have the grace to be able to witness to them in spite of fear of suffering and death. Which, that's something. Cause the purpose of this podcast, in part, is to inspire the next generation of virtuous leaders.
Mm.
So I'd love to hear what advice you have for them for how to either start an initiative like you're doing, join something like, be someone who's capable of being invited to something like ARC, and overcome, I think, the fear it takes in order to do that.
Good luck overcoming the fear. I mean, like, I'm still afraid. I still worry about what people will say if I tweet this or if I don't say that. It was fear that kept me from getting involved in this, especially social fear. And I do think that is one of the greatest weapons that the left has wielded, which is the threat of isolation, that they will isolate you, that you will lose the people that you are the closest to. And the reality is you might, you just have to figure out, everyone's going to fear something. What do you fear? And
Mm.
ultimately for me, thank God, God had brought me through a process of, he tutored me to hear his voice. And he made it clear that this is what I was supposed to be doing. And so that kind of clarity helps, because then when you do lose the friends, because you will, when it does create family tension, because it does, you at least don't cower, and you don't go back and say, did God really say? Which is always what happens when you get to those dark places. Okay. So you have to know what God is telling you to do. And if you don't know God yet, take a look. It will be the adventure of your lifetime. You will be so powerful because it is an otherworldly power. But it is high risk. Like I tell people, I've got two different halves of my Christian life, my safe and comfortable Christian life and my high risk Christian life. My safe and comfortable Christian life happened after I had kids, and I was very biblically literate and involved in all kinds of ministry. But I played it very, very safe in terms of what I would obey and what I would ignore. And then I was so desperate for a connection with him, to hear his voice. I said, I will do anything you say just so that I can be near you, just so I can hear you talk to me. And so then I started to obey everything, and things got crazy. Like crazy things happened, high risk things, but now when he speaks, well, now I know that when I ask, he will talk to me, and he tells me to do crazy things. He tells me to start a blog. He tells me he told me to start Them Before Us. He has led me to all of these incredible opportunities. So if you're trying to figure out what that looks like you feel in your heart that you are made to do something great, because you are. You are. When you think, I'm made for something huge and great and wonderful, that is true. So now your next question is, what is the incredible thing that I am made for? Okay. And so that, I would say, first of all, ask God. And the way that I do it is I've got a very ratty journal. It's not a pretty journal. Some women have pretty journals and I don't. I have a ratty journal. I have a cheap notebook journal where I just spew. What do you want? I'm worried about this. Tell me about this. I get very, very detailed. None of this, help me be a better wife, Lord. No, I'm the help me curb my tongue in situations where I'm starting to feel threatened. Be very, very detailed with God about what you're asking him. Okay. And then open the Word of God and read until he tells you something about what you just said. And he will. Like, if you're not BSing him, there's a verse in Jeremiah that says, if you seek me, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart. So don't give him half heart. Don't BS him. Don't say what you think he wants to hear. Get raw, get honest, and get detailed about what you want, especially what he wants for you to do. And then open the Bible. Maybe you're reading through Psalms, or maybe you're in the middle of John, or maybe you just say, God, lead me to a book and a chapter. And then you open that and you read until he talks to you. And then you underline what he said and you put it in your journal and you obey, even if it doesn't make sense. So he will probably start to do that with you. It won't be, and now I want you to apply to be the president of Harvard so that you can completely renew that historical institution. It'll probably be smaller steps. And then someday you'll be the president of Harvard, who finds that they have renewed that historic institution. Your business is doing what he says. So number one, talk and ask. Number two, you probably need to look for two things. Number one, the thing that you get passionate about, and probably the thing that makes you very, very angry. Most of us have a thing or two where we think, I cannot abide this any longer, right? So pay attention to that. What are the things that make you angry? Is it that we're hemorrhaging money and the next generation is going to have to pay for it? Is it that you feel like there aren't enough channels that are accurately describing what's happening across the world in terms of like foreign relations? I mean, like, what is it that makes you angry? Like, why isn't anybody doing this? Pay attention to that. Okay. Because if you have that, why isn't anybody doing this? There's a really good chance that God is saying, because you're going to do it. You're going to do it. Okay. So you've got to look for that intersection of the things that make you angry and the thing that hardly anyone else is doing. All right. So then you kind of have a general sense of where you're going. So then you need to start doing it. That doesn't mean immediately start the nonprofit, immediately start the YouTube channel. It does mean do something related. Maybe start writing an article about that thing. Or at minimum, start listening to great podcasts or reading great books about other people that are somewhat involved in that sphere. So you can see what's out there. And then you'll really be able to identify, okay, this person has this part of the argument. These guys are doing this, but nobody's doing this other area. Okay, so it's going to show you what's already out there. It's going to give you some people that you can kind of follow in the footsteps of. And then you'll see where their footsteps end and where yours might need to begin. So what makes you passionate? What is nobody doing? And then start doing something. Start doing something related to it so that you can start to hone your skills.
Katy, your words are fire. I'm glad you're speaking to a lot of people.
Well, I've groped around in the darkness for a while before I got here.
One fun question before we start wrapping up. What was it like to meet Jordan Peterson?
Oh my gosh. So it's so funny because we went to this planning meeting in May where all the advisory, not all of them, those that could make it, about half of them were at this dinner. And oh my gosh, it was just this who's who. You know, you're going around the table and be like, well, I'm so-and-so and I used to be the national physicist for blah, blah, blah. I'm so-and-so and I run this, this platform that has 2 million subscribers. Well, I'm John Anderson and I used to be the deputy prime minister and my government was he didn't say this, but I know this. My government was the last one to not run a debt. I mean, like everybody in that room was incredible. Like Eric Weinstein dropped in. I mean, it was just nuts. It was totally nuts. And it gets to me and I'm like, I'm a nobody. And so, I just said, I'm Katy. I run Them Before Us. What I really want is I want to read the Bible with everybody in this room at some point. So I hope you'll allow me the chance to do that because ultimately at my heart, I'm a pastor's wife and I want to know you and I want to love you wherever you are. And then I said, but also this culture is batshit crazy. So I am also an activist. It has forced me to be an activist for children. So that was sort of my introduction. And then the next day we had an all-day meeting and, it's assigned seating because of course, if it's not assigned seating, everyone's sitting next to Jordan, right? So, I'm next to Jordan. And so it was 8 hours of, group discussion and then smaller discussions where we would break out in groups of 2 or 3. So I had already made a connection with and met with his wife a couple different times. So I already knew Tammy. So it was fun to just very briefly share some time with him. But he is a man where there's a lot of his attention is pulled in a lot of directions. So, yeah, it was fun.
That's so cool. What a privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just struck me that, I'm glad that you said what you did with those people because one danger that we're never going to be able to uproot completely from us is the danger of pride, right? And that might be the biggest challenge that people who are striving to lead for good face.
Yeah.
Well, let's end by if you could just tell us what we can do to support you, how people can find you, that sort of thing.
Well, you should follow Them Before Us. The best way is to go to thembeforeus.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Like we're going to light it up in 2024. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what the documentary looks like, and I can't wait to see the videos for the church curriculum when they're done, and I can't wait to watch the satirical video that is just, I mean, I love satire. I love scathing, biting, true humor. So that's happening too. I mean, I feel like I'm on the front bench watching the game and I'm like, what's going to happen? And it's like, I know the game plan and I know how I want it to end. But a lot of these things, I am also like, wow, what is this going to be like? We are in conversation with ARC about running a conference or helping to organize a conference for ARC, specifically just about the social fabric aspect of this. So I'm really excited about that too. So there's just so many things that are happening next year. Come subscribe. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram and all of that. Just follow us and get equipped. I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to train you to look at all marriage and family issues from the perspective of the child. We are going to equip you to defend the defenseless. And you probably, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably pro-life and you probably are pretty familiar with anti-abortion arguments. We are going to train you to take that child-centric, natural law, children's rights perspective onto this side of the womb and apply it to all marriage and family issues. So come and just let us equip you, and watch. Sit on the front bench with me, and watch it all happen over 2024.
Well, thank you so much for what you do. I just give you the most encouragement I can to continue, and I find it personally inspirational to meet people like you. And hope maybe I'll join you one day at ARC.
Yeah, we would love it.
Thanks. Take care, Katie.